The words hit the courtroom like a slap before the case is even called. My dad can buy you. Brandon Keller, 18 years old and wrapped in designer confidence, leans back as if this is a joke, not a court of law. Judge Frank Caprio slowly sets his pen down, eyes locking on the teenager who just tried to put a price tag on justice. For a heartbeat, no one moves. Even the air seems to hold its breath. Brandon smirks, convinced that his father's money, his father's buildings, his father's dinners with powerful people can erase whatever happened on that school zone street. But today, he's about to learn something no one around him ever taught. There are rooms in America where money doesn't talk, truth does. Before we go any further, tell us in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. And if you believe some things should never be for sale, hit subscribe and stay with this story until the very end. Brandon shifts in his seat as the clerk, Ms. Harper, rises with a case file pressed neatly against her chest. Her voice is crisp, steady too steady, for the boy who still carries a smirk he hasn't earned. Case number 2026 TR142, State of Rhode Island versus Brandon Keller, she announces. The charges follow like hammer blows: speeding 70 miles per hour in a posted 35 school zone, reckless operation of a motor vehicle, and failure to obey a lawful order. The smirk begins to thin. Judge Caprio turns his gaze toward Brandon with the calm intensity of a man who has seen every kind of arrogance walk into his courtroom and watched most of it crumble under the weight of accountability. Mr. Keller, he says gently, which somehow makes it worse. Before we proceed, I want to return to your earlier comment. You understand, it is now on the record. Brandon lifts a shoulder, careless. Yeah, I said it. His lawyer, a tall man in a navy suit who looks like he's wishing he were anywhere else, clears his throat. Your Honor, my client is 18. You, counselor. Caprio interrupts softly. Your client made a statement that directly challenges the integrity of this proceeding. We are not ignoring it. He shifts his attention back to Brandon. But first, we will address the facts. He gestures toward the witness stand. Officer Hill, if you would. Officer Marcus Hill steps forward, the kind of patrolman who carries himself like he respects every part of his badge and expects the same from others. He takes the oath, sits, and opens his incident report without ceremony. On Monday, November 4th, he begins, I was conducting speed enforcement on Brookside Avenue adjacent to Lincoln Heights Elementary School. The school zone beacons were active. At approximately 8:12 a.m., LIDAR captured a black sports sedan traveling 70 miles per hour heading westbound. A murmur sweeps through the gallery, quiet but sharp. Parents in the room exchange looks. They know that street. They know those crosswalks. I activated my lights and siren, Hill continues. The vehicle did not stop immediately. It continued for roughly 2 city blocks before pulling into the parking lot of the Keller building. He pauses, glancing briefly at Brandon. When I approached the driver, identified as Brandon Keller and requested license and registration, he replied, Call my lawyer first. The courtroom shifts, uncomfortable. I informed him that traffic stops do not work that way. Mr. Keller then asked, Do you know who pays your salary? A slow, cold silence settles in. Even Brandon's attorney closes his eyes for a brief second. Judge Caprio nods. Officer Hill, do you have body cam audio of this interaction? Yes, Your Honor. Play the relevant segment, please. A soft hiss fills the room, followed by Brandon's voice, sharper than he intended, dripping with entitlement. Do you know who pays your salary? The tone alone is enough to make the spectators lean back as if touched by something sour. When the audio ends, Judge Caprio lets the silence breathe. He does not rush it. He lets it sit heavy on Brandon's shoulders until the boy's eyes flick downward, though only for a moment. Mr. Keller, the judge says quietly, did you make that statement? Brandon taps a finger against the table. Yeah, that's what I said. So what? He adds, too fast. His lawyer closes his eyes again. So context matters, Caprio replies. Officer Hill was performing his duties. You attempted to intimidate him by invoking financial authority. Do you understand the seriousness of that? Brandon doesn't answer. He doesn't have to. His silence answers for him. Judge Caprio turns to Ms. Harper. Were there any communications to this court regarding this case before today? Ms. Harper flips open a small logbook. Yes, Your Honor. 3 contacts, 2 phone calls, and 1 voicemail, all from numbers registered to Keller Holdings Legal Affairs. Brandon's lawyer straightens. Your Honor, my client should not be held responsible for calls made by his father's office. That is highly prejudicial. Overruled, Caprio says, without looking at him. Facts are not prejudicial, Counselor. They're factual. We are documenting facts. He nods toward Ms. Harper. Read the timestamps. First call, 8:47 a.m., 35 minutes after the stop. Second call, 9:01 a.m. Voicemail left at 9:12 a.m., requesting a quiet resolution before the matter proceeds. The judge lifts his eyes to Brandon. Mr. Keller, did you contact your father immediately after you were stopped? Brandon shifts. I texted him. Do we have that message in evidence? Caprio asks. Yes, Your Honor, Ms. Harper replies. Submitted by Officer Hill with defendant's consent. She reads it aloud. Got cited. He'll make calls. Don't sweat it. A ripple goes through the room, not quite outrage, but something close. Brandon sucks in a breath, finally aware that his own casual text looks far worse when spoken aloud in a courtroom. Judge Caprio folds his hands. Expectation of rescue is not a defense, Mr. Keller. He turns back to Ms. Harper. Does the defendant have any prior citations? Yes, Your Honor. 3 prior speeding violations in the last 18 months, all resolved through counsel. The defendant made no personal court appearances. Caprio studies Brandon for a long moment. You've been cited multiple times, yet you've never had to stand here and answer for your actions. Is that correct? Brandon shrugs. My lawyer handles it. Caprio leans forward slightly. Your lawyer pays your fines, Mr. Keller. That is not the same as accountability. The judge's voice softens, turning almost parental but sharper for it. School zones exist to protect children. Officer Hill, were children present when this incident occurred? Yes, Your Honor. The crossing guard was posted, and I witnessed at least 15 to 20 students at the intersection. Caprio looks back at Brandon. You drove 70 miles per hour past 20 school children. Do you understand the stopping distance at that speed? Brandon smirks faintly. I stopped fine. No, Caprio replies, voice cutting through the air like a blade. You stopped 2 blocks after the officer activated his lights. That is not fine. That is defiance. The smirk vanishes. Caprio sits back. Now, I want to return briefly to your earlier statement. You told this court, my dad can buy you. Do you stand by that? Brandon hesitates just long enough to reveal his answer. I mean, he shrugs again. He probably could. His lawyer rises so fast his chair scrapes the floor. Your Honor, my client is inexperienced, Counselor Caprio says sharply. Your client is 18. He is an adult. Then he turns back to the boy. Are you telling this court, on the record, that your father could purchase influence over these proceedings? Brandon exhales through his nose, amused. My dad has dinner with the mayor every month. He funds half the city's charities, so, yeah. If he wanted this to go away, it would. Judge Caprio's expression doesn't change, but the temperature in the courtroom drops. Ms. Harper, he says, read that last part back. Ms. Harper reads, voice steady as stone. My dad has dinner with the mayor every month. He funds half the city's charities. So, yeah, if he wanted this to go away, it would. Another silence, but this one burns. Narrator voice, almost whispering to the audience. This is the moment arrogance oversteps its final line. Caprio finally speaks. Mr. Keller, you have just asserted publicly, on the record, that your father's wealth and connections can erase the rule of law. Brandon leans back, arms crossed, still believing this is all noise that will fade once his father makes the call. He has no idea how wrong he is. Judge Caprio lets the weight of Brandon's last sentence hang in the air, the way a storm cloud hangs before it breaks. The gallery is still no rustling papers, no shifting seats, nothing but the quiet hum of fluorescent lights and the bold, unbelievable confidence of a teenager who has never known consequences. For Brandon, silence is just space between victories. To anyone else, it's a warning. "Mr. Keller," Caprio finally says, his voice calm in a way that feels far more dangerous than shouting. "Do you understand the magnitude of what you just claimed?" Brandon lifts his chin. "I'm just saying the truth." The attorney beside him pinches the bridge of his nose. He knows what's coming. Everyone in the room knows, except the boy who thinks wealth is the same thing as wisdom. Caprio turns slightly toward Ms. Harper. "Let the record reflect that the defendant confirmed his belief that a phone call from his father could make a lawful citation disappear." Ms. Harper nods, typing rapidly. Her keystrokes echo sharp and metallic. Then Judge Caprio leans forward, voice lower, almost intimate-like he's about to tell a hard truth. "Mr. Keller, I have seen men twice your age and 10 times your wealth stand in that very spot and tremble because they understood what it means to challenge the fairness of a courtroom. But you," he studies Brandon as though trying to understand him, "you believe money replaces responsibility." Brandon shifts, pretending to stay relaxed, but his eyes flicker. "Let's review a few things," Caprio continues. "First, you endangered children. Not hypothetical children, real ones. Children whose parents trust that when they send them to school, they will come home safely. Second, you attempted to intimidate an officer doing his job by questioning who pays his salary." He pauses, letting the boy sit with that. "Third," the judge adds, "you walked into this courtroom and tried the same tactic on me." A low murmur ripples through the gallery again. Narrator to audience. This is the moment when the ground beneath Brandon begins to shift, though he still thinks he's standing on marble instead of thin ice. Judge Caprio continues, "Before I address the legal ramifications, I want to understand something. Officer Hill, during your stop, were there children visible near the crosswalk?" Officer Hill nods. "Yes, Your Honor." A group of about 20 kids had just crossed with the guard. A few lingered near the sidewalk. Caprio turns slightly to Brandon. 20 children. At 70 miles per hour, your stopping distance would have been over 200 feet. Do you know what happens to a child when a car traveling that speed hits them? Brandon swallows, annoyed at the lecture. "I didn't hit anyone." "But you could have," Caprio replies. And that's the difference between remorse and arrogance. One understands what could have happened. The other only thinks about what didn't. Brandon's chest tightens, but pride holds him upright. "Now," Caprio says, interlacing his fingers, "Ms. Harper, remind the court again. How many prior citations?" 3 speeding violations in 18 months, she replies, all resolved through counsel without personal appearance. "And the speeds?" Caprio asks. 58 in a 35, 62 in a 40, and 65 in a 45. A few eyebrows lift in the gallery. "So this is not new behavior," Caprio says plainly. Brandon's attorney finally speaks, voice low and urgent. "Your Honor, my client is 18. Teenagers make poor choices." "Poor choices," Caprio repeats gently, as if tasting the words. "Poor choices are forgetting homework. Poor choices are missing curfew. 70 miles per hour through a school zone is not a poor choice, counselor. It is reckless disregard for human life." The lawyer sits. Caprio shifts again, posture tall and steady. "Now, Mr. Keller, we return to your statement. My dad can buy you. Since you seem to take pride in it, I'd like you to explain to me and to everyone here what you meant." Brandon opens his mouth, but nothing articulate comes out. He fumbles for a second before forcing a shrug. I mean, he knows people, important people. It's how things work. A few gasps break the air. Brandon mistakes them for agreement, not horror. You believe justice is negotiable? Caprio asks. Brandon shrugs again, softer this time. That's just how the world is. For you, Caprio says, perhaps. Narrator. And there it is, the crack in the armor. Not the judge's, but Brandon's. Caprio nods to Ms. Harper. Please read the full quote again. She reads it, voice steady. My dad has dinner with the mayor every month. He funds half the charities in the city. So, yeah, if he wanted to make a call, this goes away. The courtroom reacts again, murmurs, sharp inhales, a subtle turning of heads toward Brandon as if seeing him clearly for the first time. Caprio waits until the last whisper dies. Mr. Keller, he says, statements like that don't just insult this court. They erode public trust. They tell every citizen who listens that fairness can be purchased, that the law only applies to those who cannot afford to bend it. Do you understand how dangerous that is? Brandon shifts, the first sign of discomfort showing, not fear, but frustration, the sense that he is finally encountering a system he can't bully. Judge Caprio turns to Officer Hill. Officer, did the defendant show any remorse or understanding of the situation at the scene? Hill shakes his head. No, Your Honor. He was dismissive. He repeated that his father would take care of it. Caprio nods once, slowly. Of course. Then he leans back, lacing his hands again, face unreadable. Mr. Keller, he says, what do you think should happen here today? Brandon blinks. What do I think? Yes, Caprio replies. You seem confident in the influence your family holds. So tell me, what outcome do you believe you deserve? The question is both a rope and a test. Brandon grabs the rope right around his own neck. I mean, pay the fine, whatever. Then leave, that's it. The final misstep. Narrator. If arrogance were fuel, Brandon just poured a gallon on the fire. Caprio closes the file in front of him. A small sound soft, but final. Very well, he says. We will proceed. He begins with the facts, reciting each charge with the precision of a surgeon, slicing through excuses. His tone is measured, patient, unshakable. Every word draws the contrast between law and entitlement. On the matter of speeding, he says, the evidence is clear. LIDAR reading, timestamp, and witness testimony confirm you were traveling 70 in a 35 school zone. Brandon's jaw flexes. For reckless operation, Caprio continues, your failure to stop promptly after police activation substantiates the charge. For failure to obey a lawful order, your refusal to provide documentation until you called your lawyer is unambiguous. He pauses. I find you guilty on all counts. Brandon stiffens, finally realizing this isn't going his way. But Caprio isn't finished. However, he continues, these traffic violations, though serious, are not what concerns me most. He opens a new file. Inside is the transcription of Brandon's statements. What concerns me, Caprio says slowly, is that you attempted to intimidate both an officer of the law and this court by invoking money and influence. That is not merely disrespectful. That is direct contempt of court. Brandon's eyebrows shoot up. His attorney whispers urgently, remain calm. Caprio keeps his eyes on the boy. Direct contempt occurs when behavior in the presence of the court obstructs justice. It is not theoretical. It is not metaphorical. You told this court that justice could be bought. You told this officer that his service, his duty to protect children, was subject to your father's bank account. He shifts slightly in his seat, voice smooth as stone. Do you understand, Mr. Keller, that your words carried far more danger than your speeding? Brandon exhales, but it's shaky this time. And Caprio's next line lands like a gavel already falling. You have told this courtroom, on the record, that justice is for sale. That alone demands a response. Narrator, this is the moment when Brandon realizes he is not in his father's building, his father's office, or his father's world. He is in Judge Caprio's courtroom, and nothing his father owns can help him here. Judge Caprio takes a slow breath. and something in the room shifts like gravity tightening. Brandon feels it too. His posture stiffens, his smirk struggling to hold its shape. Maybe for the first time in his life, he senses that he has wandered into a place where wealth, the one shield he has always relied on, does not reach. "Mr. Keller," Caprio begins, voice steady. "I want you to listen carefully. What happens in the next few minutes is not about your father, his wealth, or his social calendar. It is about you." Brandon tries to look unaffected, but his fingers tap nervously on the table. The judge notices. "We've discussed your traffic violations," Caprio continues. "The evidence is overwhelming and uncontested. You traveled 70 miles an hour in a 35 zone with children present. You failed to stop when ordered. You attempted to dictate the terms of the stop." He glances at Officer Hill. "Fortunately, your poor judgment did not end in tragedy." Then he turns back to Brandon. "But your conduct that followed, the entitlement, the threats, the invocation of your father's wealth, is what demands our deeper attention." The judge leans forward slightly. "Let me explain why." Narrator to audience. This is the moment where the courtroom becomes a classroom, and the lesson is one Brandon was never taught at home. In a courtroom, Caprio says, justice must be seen as fair, not purchased, not influenced, not manipulated. When you tell an officer, "Do you know who pays your salary?" you're not just being rude. You are attempting to intimidate a public servant whose duty is to protect this community. Brandon swallows hard. When you tell this court, "My dad can buy you," you're not merely insulting me. You are attacking the very foundation of justice. Caprio's voice is still calm, but now it carries a subtle tremor, the kind that comes not from anger but conviction. You are telling every person watching that justice bends to those who can afford to bend it. That truth can be negotiated, that laws are optional for the wealthy. Caprio pauses, letting the words sink in. "And that, Mr. Keller, is where your biggest mistake lies." Brandon opens his mouth to respond, but Caprio gently raises a hand. "No, not yet." He flips open a thin, cream-colored folder. "Ms. Harper, has the court verified the defendant's father made attempts to contact this court?" "Yes, Your Honor," she replies. 3 attempts. Caprio nods. "This only substantiates the mindset you exhibited today, that consequences are optional." Narrator. The teenager who entered with swagger is beginning to look less like a prince and more like someone discovering the world has rules he never studied. "Now," Caprio continues, "let us address sentencing for your traffic violations before I deal with your more serious conduct." He lists them calmly. Fines for speeding in a school zone, $700. Fines for reckless operation, $300. Fines for failure to obey a lawful order, $200. Brandon's lawyer scribbles the amounts, relieved to relieved, but the judge hasn't finished. "In addition," Caprio says, "your driver's license is suspended for 90 days effective immediately. You will complete a certified driver safety course before eligibility for reinstatement." Brandon blinks. 90 days. You can, I can," Caprio says simply. "And I have." Brandon's lawyer quickly whispers, "Don't speak unless I tell you to." But now Caprio closes the traffic file. The click echoes like a lock turning. "Now, Mr. Keller," he says, "we come to something far more serious." The gallery leans forward. Even the air feels charged. "You have committed direct contempt of court." Brandon stiffens. "Contempt? For what?" You told this court it could be bought," Caprio replies. "You stated your father's influence could dictate judicial outcomes. You implied that justice is negotiable." He straightens, speaking with the calm finality of a man who never rushes and never wavers. Direct contempt is misconduct witnessed by the court, in real time, that obstructs justice. It requires no jury, no delay, and no further evidence. Brandon's breath catches. Caprio continues, "Your comments were deliberate. They were not slips of the tongue. You repeated them twice, once to Officer Hill, once here in open court. They were calculated to pressure, intimidate, and undermine. Narrator: This is where the walls close in. For that reason, Caprio says, the court has no choice but to respond swiftly and clearly. He lifts his hand, slightly, just enough to change a boy's entire world. For direct contempt of court, I am sentencing you to 30 days at the adult correctional institutions. Brandon's world stops. His lawyer leaps to his feet. Your Honor, this is sit down, counselor, Caprio orders. His tone is razor calm. Your client spoke twice. He meant what he said. The lawyer collapses into his chair. Brandon's voice cracks. Wait, what? No, you can't, my dad. Your father, Caprio interrupts, will do nothing. This is direct contempt. The sentence is immediate. Panic floods Brandon's face. It is unmistakable, raw, and new in emotion he's never had to show. Officer Daniels, Caprio says, barely turning his head, take Mr. Keller into custody. The bailiff steps forward. Brandon pushes back in his chair. No hold on, Dad will fix this. He'll call heel, Officer Daniels, Caprio repeats, firmer. The metallic click of handcuffs echoes through the room. Brandon freezes, eyes wide, breath shallow. The teenager who entered the courtroom acting invincible now looks like a child lost in a storm he never expected. Narrator to audience. This is what happens when the real world finally says no to someone who has only ever heard yes. Ms. Harper checks the clock. For the record, Your Honor, time is 10:34 a.m. Caprio nods. 34 minutes from call of case to custody. He looks at Brandon, whose bravado is gone. Mr. Keller, actions have consequences. Your words have consequences. Today you learn that lesson. Brandon tries to speak, but the bailiff gently turns him, guiding him toward the side door where steel bars and concrete walls await. The last thing the boy sees before leaving is Judge Frank Caprio looking down at his notes. Expression calm, not triumphant, not cruel, simply steady. The expression of a man who knows justice means fairness, not favor. Next case, Caprio says. And just like that, the world continues except for Brandon Keller, whose world has just been flipped upside down. The heavy door closes behind Brandon, but the courtroom doesn't have time to exhale. Judge Caprio doesn't lean back, doesn't soften, doesn't pause for the drama that everyone in the gallery is still processing. He simply turns a page, resets his posture, and gestures for the clerk to continue as though the previous 34 minutes did not just uproot an entire life. Ms. Harper steps forward again. Next case, 2026 TRRER 43, State of Rhode Island versus Elena Morales. A woman in her early 50s rises slowly from the second row. She clutches a thin stack of papers to her chest, the way some people hold onto life vests. She approaches the bench with nervous steps, nothing like the swagger Brandon carried. Her jacket is worn, the elbows slightly faded, and her hands tremble just enough that the papers flutter. Judge Caprio softens instantly. Good morning, Ms. Morales, he says, tone warm, welcoming so different from the tone he used with Brandon that even the gallery shifts, feeling the contrast as a message in itself. Good morning, Your Honor, she whispers. Let's take a look at your citation, Caprio says. It says here you were issued a ticket for an expired registration, 3 days overdue. Is that correct? She nods quickly. Yes, Your Honor. I'm sorry. I forgot the date. I worked 2 jobs, and the week got away from me. But I paid the registration the next morning, right here. She lifts a receipt with the same caution someone might use to offer proof of innocence. Caprio studies the paper, then looks at her again. Ms. Morales, you paid the registration fee within 24 hours of being cited? Yes, Your Honor. And you came to court in person today, even though you could have mailed the ticket? Yes. I didn't want you to think I was being irresponsible. Narrator to audience. Listen closely here. In the same courtroom where a wealthy teenager bragged about buying influence, a hardworking woman apologizes for being 3 days late on a renewal. This right here is the contrast that reveals the heart of justice. Caprio smiles gently. Ms. Morales, life is complicated. People forget dates. People juggle responsibilities. What matters is you took responsibility immediately. He adjusts his glasses. I'm reducing the fine to $25. Her breath catches, shock first, then relief, then gratitude so pure the entire room feels it. Thank you, Your Honor, she whispers. Thank you so much. Caprio nods. Thank you for your integrity, Ms. Morales. Have a wonderful day. She gathers her papers and walks back to her seat, wiping her eyes. The courtroom watches in silence, maybe because they feel the relief with her, or maybe because they can still see Brandon's pale face in handcuffs in their peripheral memories. The judge returns to his notes, and something subtle yet powerful happens. The courtroom itself changes. It becomes clearer that fairness is not about harshness or leniency, it's about balance. Narrator to audience. This is where many people misunderstand Judge Frank Caprio. He is not just merciful, he is precise. He reads intentions the way a surgeon reads scans. But today he has another purpose. Before adjourning the morning session, Caprio straightens the papers in front of him and says, "Before we move on, I want certain matters entered into the record." He looks at Ms. Harper. Please record the following policy recommendations to be forwarded to the Municipal Court Administration and the Office of the Mayor. The gallery leans in slightly. Even the attorneys in the back row pause their whispers. Caprio begins reading. 1. Establish a weekly ex parte influence log for all cases. Any attempt to contact the court outside official channels, including from law firms, corporate counsel, or political offices, shall be documented and published. Ms. Harper types quickly. 2. Create a confidential hotline for court staff to report interference attempts. Any effort to pressure, intimidate, or sway judicial proceedings will trigger review and investigation. A few older men in suits shift uncomfortably. They know what that means for certain people in this city. 3. Conduct a citywide audit of school zone speed beacons and publish all results on a public dashboard to ensure transparency. A mother in the front row nods quietly. 4. Develop a neutral enforcement script for officers to use when drivers invoke wealth or influence during traffic stops. Officers deserve clarity and protection when confronted with these tactics. And finally, 5. Issue updated guidance stating that on-record intimidation of the court or its officers will result in immediate custody, regardless of the defendant's resources. He lowers the paper. The gallery murmurs. They all understand what just happened. Brandon Keller didn't just earn consequences for himself, he triggered systemic reform. Narrator. Ironically, the boy who believed money gave him power just inspired policies that strip power from those who tried to use money to corrupt justice. Caprio lifts his gaze to the courtroom. If you believe influence should never touch traffic cases, he says, the closest he ever gets to breaking the fourth wall inside the courtroom, then let this be a model for how we move forward. One of the reporters in the back quietly turns on a microphone. Caprio continues with the remaining cases, each handled with the same calm consistency. But unbeknownst to him, the body cam clip from Brandon's stop has already hit the public record. One clerk uploaded it earlier that morning as part of standard procedure. And in an age where nothing goes unnoticed, it takes only hours for someone online to splice together the clip of Brandon saying, "My dad can buy you," with the footage of him being led out in handcuffs. By evening, the video hits 200,000 views. By the next morning, it's on local news channels. By the afternoon, national outlets pick up the story. Rich teen says my dad can buy you leaves courtroom in handcuffs. Narrator. Suddenly, the world sees what happened in Caprio's courtroom. And for once, the comment section unanimously agrees. Justice was served. But, while social media debates, Keller Holdings Legal Affairs works overtime, moving faster than ever. Within a week, Brandon's father's legal team files a motion to vacate the contempt charge. Their arguments are predictable. youthful indiscretion, constitutionally protected hyperbole, no criminal history, significant charitable contributions from the Keller family. One letter even highlights that Gregory Keller once funded a playground near a school. Zonus if philanthropy could substitute accountability. But Judge Caprio responds not from the bench, but through a written decision. 2 pages, single-spaced. And the final paragraph becomes something people screenshot and circulate widely. The defendant's statement was not hyperbole. It was a calculated assertion that wealth supersedes law. Such statements made in open court strike at the heart of public trust. The contempt finding stands. The motion is denied. Narrator: justice does not apologize, not when someone tries to buy it. 15 days into his sentence, Brandon appears on video for his review hearing. Gone is the polished hair, the branded hoodie, the watch that cost more than some people's rent. Instead, he wears a correctional jumpsuit the color of faded clay. His face is thinner now, his eyes restless. Judge Caprio regards him calmly. "Mr. Keller, you requested this review. The question is simple. Have you shown reflection? And would continued custody serve any further purpose?" Brandon clears his throat. "Your Honor, I want to say something." Caprio nods. "Go ahead." For a moment, it looks like Brandon might try to regain his old posture, but then he exhales and something like sincerity flickers. "I was wrong," Brandon says. "I thought money meant power. I thought my dad's success meant I didn't have to follow the same rules as everyone else. I was arrogant. I was disrespectful. And I could have hurt kids. I didn't think about that till now." Caprio studies him, expression unreadable. "Are these your words, or the words of someone advising you?" "My words," Brandon replies. 15 days gives you a lot of time to think. Narrator: for the first time, the boy speaks like someone who has lived a few extra years in just 2 weeks. Caprio folds his hands. Good. Shame is not the end of the story, but often the beginning. He continues, "I am reducing your custody to time served 15 days. Brandon exhales, relief washing over him. "But," Caprio adds, "you will complete a restorative accountability plan, in full, or the remaining 15 days will be reinstated." Brandon nods. "Yes, Your Honor. The plan is detailed, demanding, and precise. 200 hours of community service with the school safety program. Morning and afternoon crossing guard duty in the exact school zone where he sped. In-person apologies to Officer Hill and the principal of Lincoln Heights Elementary. A public service announcement about school zone safety. A driver safety reflection course. An 800-word written reflection, no PR language allowed." Caprio meets Brandon's eyes. "Do you accept all terms?" "Yes, Your Honor." "Then you are released today. His father's wealth never arrives to save him. Only responsibility will." Narrator: this is not the end of Brandon's story. It's the beginning of who he might become. Brandon's release papers were processed within 30 minutes, but stepping out of the ACI building didn't feel like freedom. It felt like stepping into a world that no longer worked by the rules he relied on. The sun hit his eyes, brighter than he remembered, almost too honest. The security gate clanged shut behind him, its metallic echo following him like a reminder. You're not done, not even close. He expected someone from his father's staff to pick him up, a driver, a family aide, anyone. No one came. Instead, an assistant from the school safety program, a woman in her 30s named Dana Rivers, pulled up in a city-issued van, waved at him through the window, and shouted, "You Brandon Keller, hop in. Orientation starts in 20 minutes." Brandon blinked. Orientation? Like, right now? Dana shrugged. "You're on the schedule. Let's move." He hadn't even changed out of his beige release uniform yet, but this wasn't a world that waited for him anymore. The school safety program headquarters wasn't exactly a headquarters. It was a renovated room inside an aging municipal building, walls lined with highlighter yellow safety vests and steel cabinets labeled stop signs, cones, rain gear. A faded poster on the back wall read, "Slow down, kids live here." 3 other volunteers sat in metal folding chairs, 2 retirees, 1 college student. They stared at Brandon not with awe or recognition, but with mild curiosity. He wasn't used to being part of a group that didn't orbit around him. Dana clapped her hands. "All right, everybody. Let's welcome Brandon. He'll be joining us for the next 200 hours. The retirees smiled warmly. Brandon forced a polite nod. Orientation wasn't complicated, but it was humbling. Crossing guard basics, whistle signals, hand gestures, safety positions. Brandon sat stiffly, absorbing information he had once seen as beneath him. But everything changed when Dana hit play on a short video demonstration. The footage showed a car blasting through a school crosswalk well below 70 miles an hour, but fast enough that the crossing guard had to pull a little girl back by the hood of her jacket. The girl's backpack flew open, paper scattering like frightened birds. Brandon felt his stomach twist. "That," Dana said, pointing at the screen, "is why we're strict." Narrator to audience. Pain has a way of slipping silently into a person. Sometimes it arrives before they even notice. His first official shift was at 7:45 a.m. on a bitter, 34-degree Tuesday morning, the kind of cold that nipped at fingers and settled deep in the joints. He stood at the corner of Brookside Avenue, the intersection, wearing a reflective vest, too big for him, and wool gloves that smelled faintly of storage. The crossing guard, Mr. Patel, handed him a stop paddle. "Hold it like this," he instructed, demonstrating the angle. "Firm, but not aggressive. You're a barrier, not a threat." Brandon nodded. "When you step into the crosswalk," Patel continued, "cars stop. When you step back, they go. You control the flow." Brandon tried to focus, but his eyes kept drifting toward the exact spot where Officer Hill's cruiser had pulled behind him that morning, the day the world stopped bending to him. Kids began arriving in small clusters, spuffy jackets, neon backpacks, half-awake expressions. Some of them barely reached his hip. Their parents watched from parked cars or walked beside them, hands wrapped protectively around tiny shoulders. Brandon raised the stop paddle. Mr. Patel stepped beside him. Cars slowed. Children crossed. For the first time, Brandon saw the street not from a driver's seat, but from a child's eye level. And it hit him. The speed he had been going, the distance he didn't allow himself to understand. A mother walking her son met his eyes. She paused, recognition flickering across her face. Not celebration. Not forgiveness. Just awareness. She didn't speak. She didn't scold. But that quiet look, filled with disappointment and relief, did more than shouting ever could. Narrator. There are looks you remember forever, especially when they come from someone who never raised their voice. By the end of week 1, Brandon had crossed off 28 hours of service, but every shift left him with a strange aconite physical, but internal, reflection, confrontation, the kind of discomfort wealth had always shielded him from. Week 3 arrived, which meant facing the next requirement, the apology to Officer Hill. Brandon walked into the police station with palms sweating inside his gloves. Quiet voices, squeaky floors, officers shuffling paperwork. It all made him feel small, not humiliated, just human. Officer Hill entered the room. Brandon stood up so fast his chair scraped loudly. "Officer Hill," Brandon began, voice tight. "I'm here because, well, the court ordered it. But I want to say something that isn't part of the court order." Hill raised an eyebrow. "All right," Brandon swallowed. "I'm sorry for what I said to you, for how I acted. I thought being a Keller meant I could talk to anyone however I wanted. I didn't respect your job, or the danger I caused, and I was wrong." Officer Hill studied him for a long moment, not skeptical, just searching. Then he nodded. "Thank you for coming. And I hope you truly mean what you said." "I do," Brandon replied. "Good," Hill said, "because what you did could have ended somebody's life. That's something you don't forget." Brandon nodded, throat dry. Week 5. Apology to Principal Marlene Coleman at Lincoln Heights Elementary. She read his handwritten apology slowly, shut the paper, and looked at him. "Our students deserve to feel safe walking to school," she said. "Many of them already face enough challenges without worrying about cars speeding past the crosswalk." "I know," Brandon murmured. "I hope," she added, "that you remember their faces when you're back behind the wheel." He didn't need to answer. She already knew he would. Week 8 brought the toughest test yet. The PSA recording. The first script he submitted mentioned how his family supports community initiatives. It lasted 15 seconds before Dana crossed it out with a thick red pen. "Try again," she said. He did. And the second version was "Rawr." "I drove 70 miles an hour past children," he said into the camera. "I thought I was above the rules because of my family name. I wasn't. Speed limits exist for a reason." Dana reviewed it, nodded once, and approved it. And for the first time, Brandon felt lighter. Narrator. Sometimes telling the truth out loud is the only way to hear yourself. Weeks 10 through 12 were rougher. Someone leaked a photo of Brandon holding the stop paddle, with the caption, "Keller de jour, now works for minimum wage." It spread fast. Classmates, old friends, even strangers. His group chat lit up with screenshots. "Bro, is that really you?" "LOL man" fell off hard. Crossing guard era. Brandon felt humiliation burn under his skin. His old self would have snapped back, mocked them, bragged about his cars. But now, he turned off his phone and went back to the crosswalk. The world didn't revolve around him. It revolved around the children, walking safely from one side of the street to the other. That was enough. One evening during week 11, as the sun dipped low and painted the street in a fading gold, Brandon looked up and froze. Across the street, leaning against a lamppost, stood his father. Gregory Keller, builder of towers, donor of museums, owner of half the skyline, watching quietly as his son lifted the stop paddle and helped a group of third graders cross. He didn't wave. He didn't call out. He just watched. And for once, he didn't look disappointed, or angry, or calculating. He looked proud. Proud in a strange new way. Not proud of accomplishment, proud of character. Brandon felt something tighten in his chest. Narrator to audience. Some lessons money can't teach. Some lessons even fathers can't teach. Only consequences can. When Brandon finally completed his 800-word reflection essay, he didn't write about his father, or influence, or public image. He wrote about the sound of children laughing while crossing the street, the cold mornings, the scraped knee he bandaged on a first grader, the way Officer Hill had looked at him, not with anger but with expectation. He wrote, "I thought money made me untouchable, but it only made me unaware." When he finished writing, he realized he'd stopped thinking like a Keller heir and started thinking like a young man who wanted to change, and maybe was changing. His 200 hours were nearly up. His apologies delivered. His PSA approved. His reflection written. But the biggest change wasn't in the paperwork. It was in him. By the start of week 13, Brandon Keller had crossed off 178 hours from his service. Logan accomplishment he never imagined for himself. But something strange had happened along the way. Each hour no longer felt like a punishment. It felt like a mirror. Every morning at the crosswalk, every whistle blown, every cautious step taken with a child's hand in his, reflected back a version of himself he didn't recognize, but didn't hate. Yet even as he grew into this new rhythm, the world around him didn't stop testing his resolve. That Monday morning, a black SUV slowed beside the sidewalk where he stood with his stop paddle. The tinted window rolled down. His old friend Chase Hoffman, baseball cap backward, designer sunglasses, smirk loaded with mockery, leaned out. "Well, well," Chase called. "Look at this. Brandon Keller, public servant." Two more friends leaned toward the window, laughing far too loudly for 8 a.m. Brandon's grip on the paddle tightened, but he kept his gaze on the approaching children. Chase kept going. "Dude, we're heading to the track later. Want a break? Or are you booked solid playing hall monitor?" More laughter. The crossing guard next to him, Mr. Patel, gave them a single unimpressed glance. Brandon inhaled the cold air deeply. "Move along, Chase." "Oh," Chase teased. "The crossing guard has spoken." A small group of parents nearby stiffened at the sarcasm. Mr. Patel stepped forward. "Gentlemen," he said calmly, "this is a school zone. Keep driving." Chase snorted, rolled the window up, and sped off. Brandon felt the word idiot rise to his tongue but swallowed it. Not out of fear, out of clarity. Narrator to audience. Humiliation once defined him. Now it barely dents him. That's how you know someone is changing, not when they stop making mistakes, but when they stop letting mistakes make them. The rest of the hour passed smoothly, but that moment stuck in his chest, not because Chase had mocked him, but because he hadn't cared. For the first time in his life, the approval of his privileged circle felt irrelevant. Week 14 brought heavier weather. A storm dumped sleet across Brookside Avenue, turning the pavement into a glistening hazard. Brandon arrived, wearing thick gloves, a scarf, and a reflective poncho that flapped in the wind like a battered sail. Mr. Patel pressed a hand on his shoulder. "Bad weather means we are more important, yes?" Brandon nodded, and despite the freezing wind, he felt warmth in the acknowledgement. That morning tested every inch of patience and reflex he had. Cars skidded, children slipped. One little boy dropped his lunchbox and watched helplessly as it slid toward the gutter. Brandon jogged after it, scooping it up before a passing tire could crush it. "Thank you," the boy squeaked, hugging the lunchbox like a lost pet. Brandon smiled, breath fogging in the air. "Anytime." The boy ran off. His mother mouthed, "Thank you," from her car window. Narrator. There are victories too small to make headlines, but big enough to change a person. Week 15 brought an unexpected encounter, one that nearly broke him. As he stood at the crosswalk, a silver sedan pulled up. Inside sat Officer Hill. He rolled down the window and offered a small nod. "Morning, Brandon." "Morning, sir," Brandon replied. Hill watched him hold the stop sign for 3 children, then said, "You're doing good work here." Brandon didn't know what to say. Praise wasn't something he expected from a man he had once insulted. "I'm trying," he finally managed. Hill nodded. "That's all anyone can do." Then he drove on, leaving Brandon rooted to the icy pavement, with something warm blooming inside his chest. But perhaps the most meaningful shift came during week 16, when he encountered something he hadn't faced since the beginning of this journey. A frightened child. A little girl around 7 years old, small curly hair, wearing a pink coat zipped up to her chin, stood near the curb but didn't move. The other children had already crossed. She stayed frozen, eyes darting between the cars. Brandon knelt down to her height. "Hey, you okay?" She hesitated, then whispered, "The cars are too fast." Even though the posted limit was 20 in school hours, even though he and Mr. Patel were present, she shook with fear. Brandon swallowed. Hard. "I know they can look scary," he said softly. "I used to drive too fast. Way too fast. And I was wrong." Her eyes widened. "You did?" "Yes," he admitted. "And I learned how dangerous it was. That's why I'm here now, to help keep you safe." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she reached out and took his hand. Brandon felt something shift inside, something like forgiveness, but gentler, quieter. He led her across, step by step. When they reached the other side, she smiled. A small smile, but a real one. Narrator to audience. Sometimes the world gives you a second chance in the form of a 7-year-old who trusts you with her fear. Meanwhile, word spread in the district about the once reckless teenager who now braved storms, traffic, and humiliation to protect kids. Some parents nodded approvingly when they saw him. Others remained wary, arms crossed, skeptical. And that was fair. Trust wasn't owed. It was earned. One afternoon, as Brandon finished his shift, Dana Rivers approached him with a clipboard. "You're almost at your 200 hours, she said. He nodded. "Yeah, I've been keeping track. Most people, she said with a raised brow, start dragging their feet around hour 150. You haven't missed a single shift. Brandon shifted awkwardly. Well, I'm not doing this just because the judge said so. Dana looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. I know. That night, Brandon sat at his desk to finish the last part of his restorative plan, the 800-word reflection essay. He began writing slowly, but soon the words poured out faster than he could keep up. He wrote about the fear he saw in children's eyes. He wrote about the parents who trusted the crosswalk to protect what they loved most. He wrote about Officer Hill's disappointment and later, his respect. He wrote about his father watching him silently from across the street. He wrote about the luxury of never having to think about consequences until consequences wrapped around his wrists in cold handcuffs. He wrote about the hollow arrogance that once filled him and how the emptiness had finally cracked open into something real. His closing lines were simple. I spent 18 years believing money was a shield, but it was just a wall that kept me from seeing the people I endangered, a wall that kept me from seeing myself. When he set the pen down, he exhaled deeply. It felt like a confession. It felt like a release. On the morning he logged his 200th hour, Brookside Avenue greeted him with a soft spring breeze. The crosswalk was alive with children bouncing towards school. The world felt lighter. Brandon raised the stop paddle one last time. The cars obeyed. The kids crossed safely. As the final group reached the other curb, Little Pinkcoat turned back and waved. Bye, Brandon. He waved back. See you tomorrow. But he wouldn't, not as a volunteer. Mr. Patel stepped beside him. You did good work, he said. Brandon smiled. Thanks. No, Patel replied gently, touching his shoulder. Not for the court. For the kids. Narrator to audience. Sometimes punishment looks like punishment. Sometimes punishment looks like redemption. And sometimes it becomes a calling. Brandon didn't know yet which one his journey was, but he knew one thing. He was no longer the boy who walked into Judge Caprio's courtroom believing money could buy anything. He was something better. Someone better. And soon the judge would see it too. 4 months after the morning, he'd walked into Judge Caprio's courtroom wearing arrogance like armor. Brandon found himself walking into that same courtroom again. But this time, the weight on his shoulders felt different. Not heavy. Not fearful. Just real. He wore no designer jacket. No expensive watch. No symbols of the Keller dynasty. Just a plain button-down shirt and slacks his mother had ironed before he left the house. His father offered to buy him a new suit for the hearing, something respectable, but Brandon declined. Respect wasn't something you wore, it was something you earned. When he entered the courtroom, the same wooden benches, the same polished floor, and the same warm morning light filtered through the tall windows, but they didn't feel intimidating anymore. They felt familiar, like the place where everything had come undone and then rebuilt. Ms. Harper gave him a nod as he approached the defendant's table. A real nod, not pitying or condescending, just professional acknowledgement. She'd watched so many defendants pass through her clerk's desk, but very few changed the narrative of their own story. Officer Hill was seated in the gallery today, not because he had to be, because he chose to be. And on the opposite side, Principal Coleman sat quietly, with her reading glasses perched on her nose, grading papers while waiting. It made Brandon's stomach flutter. He was no longer entering as a boy being judged. He was entering as a young man, ready to be evaluated. Judge Frank Caprio walked in, robe flowing with accustomed ease, and the bailiff called for order. Caprio settled into his chair and adjusted his glasses before lifting the file Brandon's file. Except it wasn't thin anymore. It was thick, stuffed with service logs, signed statements, reports, receipts, the PSA transcript, the written reflection, and photographs of him on the corner of Brookside Avenue in sleet, sunshine, rain, and fog. Caprio flipped through the pages quietly. Mr. Keller, he said without looking up yet, you've completed your 200 hours. Yes, Your Honor, Brandon replied, voice steady. You delivered in-person apologies. Yes, Your Honor. I have statements here from Officer Hill and Principal Coleman confirming that those apologies were sincere. Caprio's eyes lifted. Not rehearsed, not guided by counsel. Brandon nodded once. They were my words. The judge turned to the next document. You recorded a public service announcement that was approved by the court. Yes. No mention of family, wealth, influence, or reputation. Just truth. Brandon's cheeks warmed. That's what you asked for. Caprio gave the faintest smile. Then he picked up the last document, the reflection essay. This, he said, lifting the stapled pages, is what impressed me most. Brandon swallowed. Caprio set the essay down gently, like something fragile. Mr. Keller, I've read thousands of apologies, thousands of statements from people trying to convince me they've changed. Most of them sound like they're hoping to check off a requirement. He tapped the essay. Yours did not sound like that. Brandon felt a tightness in his chest, a warmth he wasn't ready for. Caprio leaned back. Before I deliver my ruling, I want you to summarize what you learned. In your own words. Brandon nodded, took a breath, and stepped forward. I learned that rules don't exist to punish people, he began softly. They exist to protect them, especially the people who can't protect themselves. I learned that my father's money doesn't make me special, it just gave me advantages I didn't deserve. He paused. The room was silent. I learned that respect isn't something you're born into, or something you can buy. It's something you build, slowly, and it's fragile. Caprio's eyes stayed locked on him. And, Brandon continued, I learned that when I told you, my dad can buy you, I wasn't showing power. I was showing how empty I was inside, how much I leaned on his strength instead of building my own. He exhaled shakily. I'm not proud of who I was, but I'm trying to become someone I can be proud of. The courtroom remained still quiet in a way that wasn't uncomfortable, but reverent. Narrator to audience. This is the moment a story bends, not because a judge demanded change, but because a defendant embraced it. Judge Caprio clasped his hands. Mr. Keller, you've stopped borrowing power and started building character. Brandon lowered his eyes, humbled. Caprio continued. You completed every requirement of your restorative accountability plan. You exceeded expectations in both conduct and sincerity. Therefore, your community service is marked as complete. A soft ripple moved through the gallery. Your driver's license suspension, Caprio added, is hereby lifted, contingent on the successful completion of your driver safety course, which you have already provided proof of. Brandon exhaled, relieved, but not in the way he thought he would be. This relief wasn't about freedom. It was about closure. This matter, Caprio finished, is closed. Do not come back to this courtroom, Mr. Keller. Brandon nodded with conviction. I won't, Your Honor. Good, Caprio said, pointing his pen lightly for emphasis, because next time there will be no review hearing. A few people in the gallery chuckled. Even Brandon cracked a small, genuine smile. Judge Caprio closed the file. You're free to go. Brandon stood still for a moment, absorbing the weight of the words, until Caprio gave a small, fatherly gesture toward the exit. He stepped away from the table. Officer Hill gave him a nod. Principal Coleman offered a brief smile. Even Ms. Harper murmured, "Good luck, Brandon," as he walked past. He realized something startling. No one was looking at him as a criminal. They were looking at him as someone who had changed. 6 months later, the city implemented each of the judge's policy recommendations. The ex parte influence log went live on the municipal website. In its first month, it documented 11 attempts at improper communication EEC declined and made public. The clerk hotline received 19 calls. 6 led to investigations. 2 resulted in disciplinary action. The school zone speed beacon audit uncovered 12 malfunctioning beacons across the city. All were repaired within 60 days. Compliance improved. Accidents decreased. And in the biggest shift of all, the state judiciary adopted Caprio's court contempt guidance memo, citing the Keller case as the precedent. Judges across the state now had clear authority to respond to wealthy defendants who attempted to intimidate officers or the court. Narrator. Justice, once shaken by arrogance, found its footing again stronger than before. On a quiet Friday afternoon, after finishing his last case of the week, Judge Caprio sat alone in his chambers. He opened his bench book to the docket from the morning Brandon had challenged the court with 5 arrogant words. "My dad can buy you." In the margin beneath the original notes, he wrote one more line. "The bench is not for sale. It never was. It never will be." He closed the book, turned off the lamp, and locked the door. Across town, as dismissal time neared, Brandon was parked far down Brookside Avenue further than necessary. He watched the light blinking over the school zone. Children streamed across the crosswalk, hand in hand, backpacks bouncing. He stayed still, not because he was required to, because he wanted to. He waited. He breathed. He remembered. He didn't move his car until every last child had crossed safely to the other side. And that more than any court order, any essay, any PSA was the true measure of change. There are moments in life when consequences feel like the end of the world, but sometimes consequences are really invitations, opportunities to rebuild, to rethink, to rediscover who we are capable of becoming. Brandon Keller learned, as many of us eventually do, that privilege can blind us, but humility can open our eyes. True strength isn't inherited. It's forged in the moments when we choose responsibility over excuses, integrity over ego, and growth over comfort. Let this story remind us that rules don't exist to punish, they exist to protect. And justice, when delivered with compassion, can transform more than just cases. It can transform people. Tell us in the comments, what lesson did you take from Brandon's journey? And where are you watching from? What time is it for you right now? Don't forget to subscribe for more powerful, emotional courtroom stories inspired by Judge Caprio's legacy.